morning, good afternoon, whatever time it is. Welcome to the Give Today podcast. And today we are joined by a very special guest, Melanie, who is one of our local champions. Hello, Melanie.
Hello, Bryony. Nice to see you.
And of course, I am also joined by the lovely John-James.
Hello.
I'm not alone this week.
No. Yes.
So, Melanie, maybe you could give the lovely listeners a quick introduction about who you are and what it is that you do.
I'd be delighted to. So I'm Melanie Bryan and my company is WhyNotChange. I started my company about 12 years ago now. It does feel like a very long time. I think it took me about 3 years to admit I was no longer looking for a job and this was going to be permanent. So, but here I am 12 years later. And what I do is that I help organisations, so social enterprises, charities, and also small businesses to grow. But I help them to grow in a way that's sustainable and a way in which that they hopefully will make a bigger positive difference as they do so as well.
That's brilliant.
Yeah. So how did WhyNotChange come about, Melanie?
Well, like most things in life, John, it was a bit of an accident.
Yeah.
It was never intentional. So way back in 2008 in November, if anyone can remember that far back, we were in the height of a big recession.
Yeah.
And the management consultancy I was working for effectively closed down overnight and made me redundant very unexpectedly.
Mm-hmm.
was not in my career plan, is all I'm going to say.
Yes.
So, like lots of people at that time, I found myself looking for a job, and I'd never really had to do that before. And I would get to the end of the sort of an interview process, I'd be in the last two, and the job would be withdrawn because they'd get a recruitment freeze themselves. And it was kind of soul destroying, I suppose is the best way to describe it. Now, my lovely husband, who also has a social enterprise, doesn't do stress very well. And he was a bit fed up of me getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning and still being there at midnight looking for jobs, and asked me if I would just stop. And yeah, I know. And he said, how long could we live if you just absolutely did nothing? And you know, when you get that sort of rabbit startled in the headlights kind of look on your face, that was me. Yeah. And I'm sort of saying, 3 months, it was probably a bit more, but we don't tell him, it's fine, I do the finances. And he sort of said, well, I need you to stop because I'm too stressed. And I was like, okay. So I don't really know how to do that. I've worked since I was 14. I've got no idea how to do that. And I don't know how to do nothing. So I thought, great, okay, not sure what to do. I'll do it for 4 weeks just to keep him happy. You know, I like being happily married still. And off I went, and I thought, what can I do? So I went back to volunteering, and I'd not been able to volunteer for years because the job that I had as a management consultant took me all over the world. So I would be away a lot and I couldn't make any commitments. So I went back to volunteering. And also at the same time, I discovered there was something called networking for smaller businesses and charities and social enterprises. Yeah. So I pop along to those at 7 o'clock in the morning. You got a nice bacon butty and a cup of tea. It was fine. People to talk to. It was great. And I couldn't resist interfering because people would say, what do? I go, I've got absolutely no idea, to be honest, anymore. But how can I help you? And I would be standing there. And if I was volunteering, I'd be doing things like, you know, I'd be sorting clothes, or I'd be making tea or whatever it was. And I'd be going, where does your income come from? Have you thought about X, Y, Z? And before I knew it, people were asking me if I would do things for them and offering to pay me, which was interesting. So basically, John, that's where the business came from. It was when they started doing more of that, and I started doing less of the actual looking for a job anymore, because I was more interested in what I was doing with the charities, social enterprises and small businesses.
Yeah.
Oh, it's brilliant. And like, we definitely agree, like working with charities is probably our favourite bit of what we do, because you just get to hear about what they've been up to and meet all these lovely, lovely people, yourself included as one of our local champions. And it brightens our days to be able to do that.
Yeah.
But I do also happen to know someone else that can't do nothing at all. Yes. He happens to be sat right next to me.
Yeah. We're twins, John. We're twins.
Yes, absolutely. So
my lovely grandmother always said, John, if you want something doing, ask a busy woman, but we'll make an exception for you.
Thank you. So yeah, as Bryony just said then, that's sort of working with the charities is our favourite part. What would you say is your favourite part about what you do?
I would say, I think it's being the catalyst to let other people change the world. So a couple of years ago, I was asked to do a TEDx talk, which was great. I got super excited because the subject was actually think different, think again. And I thought, oh, I could think of lots of things to talk about. And they wouldn't let me. They told me I had to talk about me, which I don't do. So I was a bit nonplussed by that, and they insisted. So I had to do it. And it made me really kind of reflect on, why do I do what I do? So what's the purpose of what I do? And I kind of figured out that actually I have lots of ideas, but I'm not probably going to have, like the one massive idea that's going to change the world. So how could I make the biggest change? And the answer was, I'm really good at helping other people to put those ideas into action. Yeah. So I can help them to go bigger, better, and faster. And so I kind of realized that really, sort of like, with my incessant curiosity, my ability to spot patterns and work out what will work what works in one area that will work for someone else, that was probably my superpower. I'll help them to change the world. So I suppose the answer to the question is that that's what I find most satisfying. What I enjoy most is watching those amazing people go on to make a bigger and better difference than they would have done without me.
I'd love to ask if any particular companies or enterprises stick out, but I would guess that you work with so many fantastic ones that none would really...
There's lots of them that stick out, but I would get lynched if I actually mentioned one or two of them on a podcast.
Yes.
they are all incredibly special, and they're all so very different as well. So one day I might be working with, a grassroots organization that works with, women who've, experienced trauma, mainly women who are immigrants. And then the next day I might be working with another social enterprise that actually advises and influences government. So I work from one end to, from one extreme to the other, everything in between. And that's what I love. I love the variety. And the fact that you've got so many amazing people who are each making a tremendous difference in our world, but doing it in such very different ways based on their passions and their life experiences. So I wouldn't dare name a single one.
I know exactly what you mean, definitely. And I would guess it's been quite tough for a lot of the businesses you work with and a lot of the charities you work with over the last, what are we at now, 18 months? And obviously you help them with grants and public sector contracts. How does that area look in the near future for these organisations in terms of funding and alternative funding streams?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly been a very interesting 18 months, hasn't it?
Yeah.
When Confucius said, I hope you live in interesting times, I'm not quite sure he had this one in mind, but it's definitely been an interesting time. I think, one of the things that struck me about the last 18 months is just how resilient organisations actually are. So many of them have just completely, stepped up in a way that I don't think they or the world could ever have imagined that they would have done, to meet the needs, in a very, very difficult time, whether that's, gin distilleries changing to make hand sanitizer, or whether it's the local charities, for example, in Manchester, who clubbed together to create ethnic food banks, recognizing that many ethnic families who needed food banks were not able to eat some of the foods that were actually on offer, making sure that was addressed. So, I think they've been amazing. So the answer to the question, I think, is that when we first went into this, there was a lot of almost, I suppose, immediate reactions from funders to think, how can we support our voluntary sector? And so they came out with a great deal of very short-term emergency funding, which was fantastic, but it was typically only for about 6 months. So it was more of what I would call a sticking plaster, than a long-term solution. And as you can imagine, at that point, the voluntary sector just went wild. I was writing grant applications literally morning, noon and night, 7 days a week, because they were desperate for money, and the money was there and they needed it. I think that sort of like in the first maybe 3 months, I think I managed to win over £500,000 of that
Wow.
for our local sort of Greater Manchester, in particular, third sector. But part of the difficulty with that is it's not sustainable. So it was literally, emergency funding either to keep an organisation going or to do a specific piece of work, and most of it had to be spent by March. So, I know, by March this year. What's changed then is that I think the funders are then in a bit of a state of flux, because of course they've given out more money than they expected to do in a 12-month period. What I'm starting to see now is that several of those are rethinking where their priorities lie. So we're seeing some of the larger funders coming out, with new priorities for their funding streams. We're seeing others of the smaller being a little bit more stringent in what they're looking for. I'm finding now that it's an interesting, because with some organisations it's not a problem, they meet those funding requirements and off they go, and that's fine, and we can start to look further ahead. With some of them, they're finding it, quite frankly, very difficult, because they no longer meet, whatever it is that's a priority, because partly also because many of them are still dealing with the pandemic issues, that have arisen. Yet the emergency funding for those has effectively stopped, and people are now looking at sustainability again, and maybe that's not there. Public sector was slightly different, because over the crisis, they pretty much, many of them, didn't put out as many contracts as they would have done, because they diverted their services to managing the pandemic. So they put on hold lots of things, and they extended lots of contracts to tide them over that period of time. So I'm seeing now that there's a flurry of delayed contracts coming out from public sector. So as the amount of grant applications has gone down, the amount of public sector tenders has gone up quite dramatically. And I think that will continue, because obviously public sector is now looking, ahead again and thinking, what do we do post-pandemic? What do we need? So I had a good one the other week, where one of the local authorities was looking at care leavers, and how do we now support care leavers and recent care leavers moving forward, which, as you can imagine, at the moment has been quite a difficult, well, it's been a difficult time for so many of our young people, but particularly those who lack those, those networks that we kind of take for granted. So we are starting to see it moving, I think, Bryony. And what I'm also noticing is on the other side of my business, so I do tenders and grant applications, but I also do mentoring to support organisations to grow. That's picking up. It's picked up a lot as organisations start to look forward. And also, I would mention, if I may, that there's a lot of funded and part-funded growth programmes out there at the moment that undoubtedly social enterprises do qualify for, the same as businesses. And it'd be great to see them take some of those up, because I also work on several of those, So again, they are available to those social enterprises and charities that trade, as well as small businesses. Often social enterprises don't think to apply.
I think it's you're right. Us especially now that the pandemic seems to, fingers crossed, touching every piece of wood available, seems to be calming down a bit. As a small business and social enterprise, it is actually now possible to think about the future and think about what's coming up and start planning. So you're right, that will
we
got
funding,
a big part.
we got funding in November 2019, and we've not applied for anything else since. We've just tried to be sustainable ourselves in that time, so
and you're right, John. I mean, and certainly, one of my top tips for organisations looking to go for the funding is to think about what happens when the funding ends. Undoubtedly funders before the pandemic, and now we're coming out of it, hopefully, and I'm with you, Brian, I'm crossing everything and touching every piece of wood in sight. They are starting to look at that again. What they all want, of course, is that at the end of the piece of work that they fund, that the work will continue, not that it will just end. So sustainability is certainly one of the things that they're very much looking for. I think the other thing that they very, very much look for as well is the evidence. So the evidence of need, which can come from things like community consultations, as well as as reports and stats that you can find as well in the public domain, but also a really clear view on what your outcomes are going to be, and that you can measure those moving forward. So one thing that I've also been doing quite a lot of in the last few months as well, far more so than previously, is looking at things like social return on investment as well, and doing quite simple calculations around that. And the results are stunning. You know, I've just done one for a very small organisation. They're actually not local, they are actually in London. They are amazed to find that for the programmes they ran last year, if you'd invested £1 in that social enterprise, it would have delivered you back £11 in social value.
Wow.
I know. Did one for a local organisation here that I've done for a couple of years, and theirs is over £14 typically.
Amazing.
I know. And when you look at that, then they're in the millions. You know, my one down in London said, I've done how much? I said, well, the social value you generated was over 1.6 million in a year. And they're like, how much?
Wow.
I guess that must be really great then, because I guess they're kind of dealing with the day to day, and they might not be able to look at the big impact that they're having overall. And so for you to be able to give them that information, I mean, it must be quite motivating for them.
Very. I mean, they were really deeply shocked. She did actually ring me up and say, are you sure? Like, yes, I'm quite sure. Here's the breakdown. I've given her the breakdown. And I think it's a different way of looking at things, isn't it? You know, so for most of them, when they hear, most organisations, when you hear social return on investment, they panic. They think it's going to be, a huge study that's going to cost a fortune. But if they've got the right data, it doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
You know, you can do very, very in-depth studies, undoubtedly, but you can also do things that are a little bit more, you know, a little quicker and lighter touch that still give you a very good result and a very, you know, and all of that is backed up because it's using national databases. You know, so the evidence bases are all there.
Okay.
And so again, if any of the organisations out there are sitting and thinking, do think about social return on investment. You know, if you do keep your data well, it will be possible for you to do it. And you can imagine if you go to a funder and say, for every £1 you invest in us, we'll deliver you £11 something back.
Yeah. I guess that then it's that sort of information then that can help an organisation maximise their likelihood of winning grants and winning tenders, right?
Oh, absolutely. And on tenders these days, most tenders actually will have a social value question. It's usually at least 10% of the marks.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, all government tenders have to have a social value question in it, but most other public sector bodies have adopted that in advance of being forced to. So you'll see it all the time. So yes, absolutely. And again, you know, to a public sector body like a local authority, hi, here we are, deliver £1 for us, we'll deliver you 1.6 million in a year. Sorry, invest in us with this contract, we'll deliver you 1.6 million in a year. It's you know, probably puts you in good stead, I would suggest.
Yes. I would imagine so.
So aside from your work that you do with WhyNotChange, Melanie, you also hold the title of Deputy Lieutenant for Greater Manchester. What does that entail, please?
Oh, that's a great question, John. So the Queen obviously can't be everywhere at the same time. So I suppose the easiest explanation today is the Queen can't be everywhere. So the Queen has an appointed representative in every county who represents her within that county when she's not present. That representative is called a Lord Lieutenant. And Bryony, just for the avoidance of any doubt, that can be a woman, but it's still called a Lord Lieutenant.
Good to know.
So we do have female Lord Lieutenants. So the Lord Lieutenant represents the Queen, but equally the Lord Lieutenant cannot do everything in a county. That's only one person. They cannot do everything in a county. So they are able to appoint a number of deputy lieutenants. And the number is determined by the size of the county. So Greater Manchester is a large county. It's one of the largest, I think it is the largest. And we have around 60 deputy lieutenants that support Sir Warren Smith, our Lord Lieutenant. Yeah. And I'm one of those. So that's kind of the explanation of what a deputy actually is. So effectively, if the Lord Lieutenant is unable to do something, he can ask me to deputise for him. So I'm deputising for the Lord Lieutenant who represents the Queen. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah. So the kind of thing we do, I think the majority of what we do, people don't kind of realise, is behind the scenes we do a huge amount to actually support our voluntary sector. So Our Lord Lieutenant has many roles for the Queen, including things around the military and keeping of the rolls and various other things. And people see a lot of the ceremonial side. So where they tend to see him and us are things like citizenship ceremonies. We'll attend the citizenship ceremonies for our new citizens who swear allegiance to the Queen. They will see us at things like award events, the Queen's Award for Voluntary Service. But what they won't necessarily realise, unless you've gone through that process, is that we promote the Queen's Award for Voluntary Service. We help organisations to apply for it. And then as part of the national process, if they are eligible and have applied, we go in and do the very detailed due diligence and assessment on them to see whether they are worthy of that award and put forward our findings back to the National Committee in London. So we do a lot of work behind the scenes on that. What people see is when they get awarded it, and then we actually go out and give them the award. They don't see all the bit that we do behind the scenes. Similarly, we very much promote the honours system, which is very dear to my heart. I was very fortunate to receive an OBE in the New Year's Honours, New Year's List 2012. And when that envelope landed on my doormat, firstly, I didn't understand it. When I worked out what it was, you could have probably heard the scream from where you are now, which was followed by my husband going, "You've got a what?" An OBE. But I rang them up and asked, how did I get this? Because I didn't understand. And they said, well, funny you should ask. So they gave me the explanation. And I had never realised that any member of the public can nominate anybody for an honour. And it's a really simple process, and you can do it online. So I'm sort of thinking, okay, I thought I was quite well read. I didn't know that. And they asked me, would I like to apply to be on the Honours Committee? So I did apply to be on the Honours Committee. It was the most grueling interview I've ever had in my life. I was interviewed by the head of the civil service, a night and a day. It was a bit frightening. I know, for a voluntary role. I want you to bear that one in mind, a voluntary role. And I served on that for 6 years, and it gave me a really great insight into how that works. And, things like over 70% of all honours in this country go to, extraordinary but ordinary people who for their community service. So here in Greater Manchester, as a lieutenancy, we actively promote the honours system, and that I lead our work on that, because I do feel very passionately about getting, our unsung heroes and heroines across the country, but particularly for me, with the focus I have within Greater Manchester, actually recognised for the amazing work that they do. I do a lot of that. So we do a lot of speaking, a lot of work behind the scenes, getting things into the media, talking to community groups and community leaders and all of that kind of thing as well. And we also do things like we lay wreaths on Remembrance Day, and very much behind the scenes we do a lot of sort of support where we know that there's this, a local social enterprise or charity or community group that could do with either a bit of advice, or that we might be able to do, or a door that we might be able to open for them, or simply a bit of profile that we can give them by making a visit, where they can get press and media and anyone else involved as well. So it's a lot. Sorry, John, and just to pull that one on the Queen's Awards, we also promote the Queen's Award for Enterprise for businesses as well, just in case any are listening.
Okay, excellent. It's really nice for you to say that about you sort of championing the unsung heroes, because that's what we're trying to do with our local champions campaign. That I think, with, like you say, with the honours, too often you hear about the sports person or the celebrity and not about the person who's doing a fantastic thing behind the scenes that nobody gets to hear about. And it's great that there's someone else trying to champion those individuals as much as we are.
Yeah, and absolutely, John. And they are actually in the majority of the people who actually receive honours. It's just that the press doesn't seem to pick them up very much.
Yeah.
They are. I mean, we've had some amazing ones in Greater Manchester and across the country. I'm more familiar with ones in Greater Manchester because I see those.
Yeah.
But I'm just thinking of ones recently. I had the very great honour of presenting a British Empire Medal to a gentleman in Atherton, and he'd set up and run a youth club for over 40 years. They make sure that those children get to eat during the holidays. He'd local carnival, he'd worked on food banks, you name it, he had done it, and you sit there and think that's exactly the kind of person who we should be recognising. And very pleased to say that, he did get a British Empire Medal. Another one, we came across a lady, in fact, I actually nominated her because I did actually know her and I hadn't realised, what she did. And I think that's the joy of, getting it right. I hadn't realised everything she did. And I suddenly discovered that, for over 20 years, she's worked, tirelessly to help immigrants to actually integrate into the community. She's provided sewing skills, she's restored sewing machines, she's run craft groups for mental health issues for women, all kinds of amazing stuff. And then in COVID, she stepped up and she started something called Headbands for Heroes, and it was nurses and midwives coming to her and asking her to create knitted the little knitted clips that you could put on to stop your ears from hurting with the masks. And she created those, but she didn't just create them, she created an army of people who did it. She had over 40 volunteers and they did over 15,000.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
I know. And it was like, what?
15,000.
Yeah.
That number's just mental.
It's just mental, isn't it? I know. And she's a disabled lady living in a little village. It was like, wow. She just got 40 people across the country, like on bikes, sending out and delivering these headbands and sitting there rotating them. And it was like, of course, she deserved an honour. And I'm really pleased to say she got an MBE. So I think, the onus is on all of us, isn't it, John? When we see these things, to actually get out there, get onto the website, which is honours.gov.uk, and actually make that happen.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, because I think sort of the beginning of the pandemic, it was great because the media also got behind championing what was going on in the communities, and you saw loads of news articles about all the fantastic things that people were doing, like ear savers, like providing face masks, or people putting up rainbows in their windows. And it felt like although it was a really difficult time, it felt like such a positive time for communities. And it would be nice to see that continue going forwards, and for people to continue to almost shout and yell about the great things that they come across and the great people they come across, and all the fantastic work that's going on.
Oh, I 100% agree. I mean, one of the things that we do as a lieutenancy, if someone comes to the attention of our Lord Lieutenant, he does actually write a letter thanking them for their work. Yeah, I know. So where we have a group or whatever, and it comes to our attention, we will absolutely, write a letter congratulating them and thanking them and recognising them, because it's so important. But I do wish that they kept up those news segments. Wouldn't it be nice if every night, instead of it being bad news, we actually had a good news bit on it?
It'd be fantastic.
We agree wholeheartedly, yes.
Can we have a bit of panic buying for social enterprises?
Yeah.
I have seen people putting up posts going like, oh, there's a terrible shortage on handmade jewellery. You must rush out and pre-order everything.
Yeah, exactly. Panic buy your social enterprise made gift here. Yes. Absolutely. But yeah, that would just be great. And I do think the more that the media would actually do that, it would help. But, hopefully also initiatives like, this one will also help very much as well in getting those messages out there.
We certainly hope so. And we're hoping that going forwards, there'll be blog pieces, podcasts and all sorts. We want to become a sort of little hub of lovely things that are going on.
Yes.
That would be good. That would be really good.
Yeah. So looking to the future, for yourself and for WhyNotChange, what have you got coming up? What's the big things coming up for you?
Oh, big things. I'm not sure big things necessarily. I think I'm one of those people who changes the world a little bit at a time, if that makes sense. Yeah. It's that accumulation, isn't it? If you do, 100 things, that'll be 100% at some point. I'm very heavily involved at the moment in delivering on the growth programs, because I am really passionate about financial inclusivity as well, and about that it shouldn't be a barrier to social entrepreneurs, charities of trade, or to entrepreneurs themselves. Many of our small businesses, although they're not social enterprises, they are incredibly socially responsible businesses who make a huge difference as well. So I'm currently working on the Help to Grow programme, which was launched by the Chancellor recently, which is available to social enterprises. I'm on the still delivering on the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Business Program. That again, although it says business in it, it is available. We have some amazing social enterprises that come through that. Some amazing ones at the moment on that as well. Okay. I'm mad busy writing public sector tenders with that, you know, seeing now the backlog of those coming through as well. And I'm ever hopeful that I might get a little bit of time to take holiday at some point. I've not had a day off in 18 months. Worked that one out. Oh. And also I've had quite a few pieces recently, which is quite interesting, on social enterprises and charities who are really thinking about how do we scale up. So I've recently just been I've completed 2 just for this week, and then a third one on its way, on how do we actually look to scale up quite substantially now that we are moving out of the pandemic. Yeah. And they're very different organisations. I've got one that works with has a really great way of actually supporting the homeless. I've got another one that's fantastic, working with disadvantaged children and young people. And the third one actually works around media film, and again with disadvantaged young adults, helping them into screen and film based jobs. So very, very different organisations as well. So hopefully more of that would be the answer as well.
Yeah. Well, if you help them grow, then I'm sure the world will be a better place for it.
I agree.
Thank you. Yeah, they are all amazing. That's all I can say. That's why I can't name any. I would.
We understand.
Yeah. So, Melanie, thank you so much for being on our podcast this morning. And we're looking forward to working with you, in the future.
You're very, very welcome.